More gelatinous than ours, and our brain is pretty doggone gelatinous. It's got to be really, really hard to stay in this head at this angle without coming out of the neck hole. You with me? So again, everything different. Next slide. All right, now this is the underside and the neck and what it all looks like. Now this is called the basilar part, and that doesn't really seal in individuals till we're about 25 years old, 20 to 25.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is kind of loose until then. So this is an adult, it's sealed, but the Starchild lost theirs. Now, this could have been it was younger than the sealing age, or it just could have bumped a rock and just knocked it out in the tumble in the water. But nonetheless, the basilar part would be there. Otherwise, everything's the same. It's pretty much the same size.
What's it for?
The basilar part is just part of the brain holding. It's a very stout, thick bone that, again, is keeping pressure off of this in the event of a hit in the front. Because if anything happens to this, you're toast. So you've got some protective. You remember the things we were just talking about, the typhoid plates that they are. So it's just part of the bracing mechanism of protecting your. But what you really see is the difference in the shape and the size of the neck. It's about half the volume, and it's an oval rather than a circle. Very different. Next slide. Okay, the areas of neck muscle attachment, and this is what we were talking about a minute ago. You have the indentation here of the inion. The neck muscles should be attaching up here if they were human, but you see the fossa down here, and you have this little area of attachment. Big area of muscle attachment here. You can see the giant, the width of the fossa right here, which are down to this here. And so you see the size of this, and this is the inion. So just redesign, a complete redesign that's so bizarrely different, and yet it's functioning, it's living. It dies as an adult. We don't know how old. Next slide. It's not a child. The zygomatic arches, cheekbones, and you see just this is a draw-in of what they normally look like, and this is the Starchild, and you see how much compressed the lower face is. All the signs of it are. Next slide. This is the chewing muscles. They come up under the cheekbones, and they spread out like this, and all of this you chew a little bit, and you can feel them moving right up there, and the Starchilds are right here. About half the volume of chewing muscle attachment. Again, a clear sign that the face is very, very reduced relative to a normal face. Next slide. Now this x-ray showed the Starchild lacked any vestige of frontal sinuses. You see the frontal sinuses in the human, that's the eye sockets right there. And you see in the Starchild, its eye sockets, and you don't see even a vestige of it. Normally when a person is born, even if they're born without sinuses, and you can be born with one of these bigger than the other one, you can be born with screwed up sinuses, but you're just not born with nothing there. That's just, you know, your body tries to do it, even if it does it wrong. It knows to do that. So what your sinuses are for, it's very interesting. You think it's for helping you with disease and colds and things like that, because that's what the medicine companies tell you when you do commercials and all your sinuses. Not so. What your sinuses are really for is to make your voice resonant, to make your voice speak like a human. Because if you don't have sinuses, you talk like a robot, like one of those things like that. You have no resonance whatsoever, right? So, and you hear people that have damaged or very bad sinuses, and that's how they sound. They don't sound, they sound weird. So it's beginning a sign that maybe the Starchild doesn't speak. The little bitty neck, the lack of the sinuses, the very big brain, this is an indication that maybe it doesn't speak. It communicates by telepathy, which everybody says that's how the Greys communicate. Next slide. All right, the CAT scan shows the Starchild's inner ears are twice the size, and this is just representative. It's the same thing, but humans are about this size, and Starchilds are just double as big. Inner ears. Now, why would you have, you know, your inner ears are for your balance. Why would you need bigger, better balance? Well, if you've got a big head sitting on a skinny little neck, you might need a finer adjustment to keep it where it is than just these big muscles that we have that can do that job. Maybe it's a more balanced, a more fine balancing thing, and that's what they would be for. It's the best answer we have. Next slide. Okay, now this is really cool. The exterior surface of bone. In a human, you have these things called lacunae. Now, we've all heard the story that our cells change out every 7 years, right? You know, every 7 years, everything but our brain changes out. Well, this is how it does in bone. Bone is constantly coming up through these things and being recycled out, and new bone is coming in, and it happens through the lacunae. All right? All bone has that. Starchild doesn't have it, as you see. Now, if you're going to be a deformity, what? Where would that go? And you're going to live. Where would that go? Very important thing. And you see, it's just like little closed out nubs, but they're not functional. Next slide. All right. This is the mass spectrometer of the human bone, and you see that there are spikes in carbon, oxygen, calcium, phosphorus, oxygen, carbon. But kind of get this in your mind. This is human bone, the way it is set up chemically by, the chemical parts of the bone. Next slide, Starchild. You look at the difference. Again, the calcium, the phosphorus. Look at the oxygen and the carbon. What is this? What does this look like? You don't know. It's collagen, the collagen of your teeth. Like your teeth are the hardest bones in your body because it has an overload of collagen. You know, when you have your teeth drilled and you have that horrible icky smell, that smell, we all know that smell, that's burning collagen. It's not burning tooth, it's burning collagen. And so what this means is that the Starchild's bone is solid wall-to-wall tooth. It's much, much harder than human bone. Next slide. This is the piece of maxilla, the attached piece of maxilla, and that's this piece up here. And you see that it had a nose opening, and you see the two teeth when there were two teeth. You see it here like this. We eventually took this tooth for testing, big mistake, big disaster. But anyway, nonetheless, this is how it looked. Next slide. You'll see it together, and you see those two fused together to make this. But guess what? This is flat. There's no arch at all. This is flat. So it indicates that it has a small tongue or no tongue at all. And that goes again to the idea that maybe it communicates by telepathy. Next slide. Now this is that piece of maxilla after the tooth is gone, but x-rayed so that you can see that it has unerupted teeth in there. And when we first took the first x-ray of this, the guy said, well, if you've got unerupted teeth and you've got teeth down, it's got to be a child, and that's where the name Starchild came from. Later we found out that the sutures were of an adult and that these teeth, as you'll see in a minute, are heavily worn. So this could be a being that, like a shark, when its tooth wears down, it can replace, which would indicate that maybe it has a lifespan of 200 years, 300 years, 500 years, we don't know. But it could have a very extended lifespan, and if it did, and if it eats like we do, and it seems to, it's going to need this over time. And there it is. Next slide. So, and here you see this tooth when it's pulled out, and it's clearly not a kid tooth. But you also see this. This is crazing, what's called crazing. It's cracking of the enamel before death. If these are white, you know it happened post-mortem and it's just the tooth shrinking up as you die. But if it's stained by food, berries, whatever, you know that this is crazing in life. And it's hard. You gotta like chew ice for 10 years to crack this. But you can also see the chips, where they're eating food that's stone ground with a pestle, and it's leaving little pieces of grit, and they're biting on that. But it's an adult. The whole point of this is not a child's tooth. It's an adult. Next slide. Okay, and this shows the cutting. Remember I told you that there was the cutting done and all that, and it's pretty extensive, and it's unfortunate. And there's stuff cutting on the top of the head too. So I hate it, but we've still got the majority of them, as you can see. We've got like 80% left or more, but we have had to. But look at you get a good shot, a good difference of the depth of the eye sockets. Very, very different. Next slide. How does mainstream science attempt to explain the Starchild? Well, they say Mother Nature can do anything, create any kind of deformity or mutation or variation, no matter how bizarre, unlikely something looks. Nature is fully capable of it. I don't know why that's not there. But that's their answer. That when we would bring these physical differences, these incredible physical differences that would make any real, normal, natural scientist jump up and down and say, boy, this is really cool. We need to find out what this is. This is not something they want to know. This is not something they want to dig into because they know it's going to upset a lot of apple carts. And so they just say, well, nature can do anything. And I had them tell me that. When I would say, all these things, they said, look, I don't care how many of these things you bring me. I don't care how many you bring me. All I have to say is nature can do anything and we win. And it's no different than religion, where they say, I don't care what you say, all I got to do is say God can do anything and I win. You know, nature is the God of science, and they use it the same way religion uses God. They do, when things they don't want to deal with, that's that's their go-to guy is God, and their go-to gal is nature. And it's unfortunate, but it makes it a very, very hard row to hoe to get anywhere with these people, because they've got you beaten with that. Next slide. But we can work around them. We've got 10 experts here who officially state the Starchild is not a known deformity. And then there's more down on the bottom, one more on the bottom. But there you go. And these guys are on the Starchild, having done a report. And the thing about these guys is they all saw the skull. They all held it and examined it and gave their opinion. All the people that you see on the internet that are like saying, oh, it's just a human deformity and all this, never seen it. They're just going from reading one report of somebody who said they didn't see it, and they say, I read a report that says it was not real, and so I say it's not real, and like that. Next slide. How do internet critics, skeptics, trolls explain away the Starchild? It was cradle-boarded, it suffered from hydrocephaly, it suffered from progeria. Those are the three things that they will tell you. Now, we're going to go over each of those and see if that's right or not. Next slide. Cradle boarding, typical cradle boarding, and an x-ray showing effects on a human skull. Cradle boarding is when native peoples strap a baby onto a board, and the woman carries the baby on her back so she can go about doing her daily work. Well, when you're born, and the human that was with the Starchild was indeed cradle boarded. For that area was very typical in primitive societies 900 years ago. I should have said the Starchild we found was died. Both of them died. They've been carbon-14 tested to 900 years ago, so this was not uncommon. But what happens is when you put a baby on a cradle board, and you have to strap its head down. You can't just go doing your work like this. The baby's head is the biggest part of its body on a very weak neck, and it'll break its neck or hurt its neck for sure. So you have to strap the head down. And when you do that, you just put a little band around it. The bones are so soft, you're going to get a flattened area about the size of my palm on the back of the head, right down to the inion, beyond which it won't go because you've got muscles starting right there, and you'd have to tear the muscles off to go any further, right? So this is what cradle boarding looks like. Now, next slide. This is the cradle boarding, and this is the Starchild. Now notice the big difference. The convolutions are there right through, the natural convolutions of the bone. They're not flat. The human that's as flat as a board, a table, the floor. And that's not, and you can see the convolutions right here. Now, a moron can see this. A moron can see this and know that it's not cradle boarded. And yet, you go right on to Wikipedia right now, and you will see that it's a cradle boarded hydrocephalic, or hydrocephalic for sure. All right, next slide. Next slide, yeah, sorry. Now, this is another thing about cradle boarding, the positions when cradle boarded. This is how the heads are set up. Well, to be cradle boarded, this guy fits perfectly sitting there, and it's, you know, he's just grooving, chucking, no problem. Put the Starchild in that, you know, going to die in just a few minutes. Again, a moron can see it. Next slide. Now, hydrocephaly, different thing than cradle boarding. They always say it's a cradle boarded hydrocephalic. Hydrocephaly, we all know, water on the brain. Well, the water comes in and it goes out in all directions. It's like blowing up a balloon. Blowing up, it doesn't differentiate. It blows up. It's fluid, and it's fluid coming in, and it's got to go somewhere. So it's, for an infant, these aren't sutured. These aren't, you know, closed together. They aren't, and so they'll spread out, and they do, and it just gets bigger, bigger, bigger until the kid dies. What happens is the pressure pushes the brain out the neck hole, like we were talking about, and that's what it'll eventually. It doesn't just blow up like a overblown balloon. It just squeezes the neck out, squeezes the brain out through the neck hole, and it dies. Next slide. Here's another one, and you see, now you could say that the Starchild might have hydrocephaly if this was, you know, because you can't blow a balloon up and have a crease in the balloon. But if this suture line was fused, then it could. If it was prematurely fused, and kids can be born, I don't know if you've ever seen those kids, they don't have them anymore, they had one in my community. When they're born with this thing fused right here, this suture fused, they grow up and their brain grows forward and their eyes go out to the side of their heads. You ever see one of those fish-eyed kids?